if you could upgrade your intelligence, and not just your IQ, but all the different forms of intelligence. I'm talking thinking faster, making better decisions, mastering your ability to self-regulate emotionally, improving verbal fluency, shooting your motivation through the roof and keeping it there, sharpening your focus and concentration, and even elevating your confidence. Not only that, but doing it the natural route, using a technology that even once you stop using it, the benefits stick around for quite a while. Now, that might sound far-fetched, but there is a system that I'm quite excited about that I've been using for about 90 sessions now, and that is called Sens.ai. It's the world's first 5-in-1 brain training system. Each of your sessions is personalized based on your body's biofeedback signals, and the session is actually adapted and tweaked and improved in real time. This futuristic technology was just released to the general public. I pre-ordered in the middle of 2022, and it's finally here. So I brought on the team to the Mind Body Peak Performance podcast to share what they've built and how it can transform your mind. Our two guests on today's show are Dr. Drew Pierson and Paola Telfer. Dr. Drew Pierson is a doctor of both Western and Eastern medicine and a board-certified neurotherapist with 20 years of neurofeedback experience. He's a decorated submarine veteran that served 6 years in the U.S. Navy, the former head of neuroscience at 40 Years of Zen, where he guided elite executives, enlightened minds, and athletes to peak performance. Paola, on the other hand, is a tech entrepreneur with a passion to develop technology that improves lives. I won't give away too much of her story because she discusses that in more depth in the episode itself, but she discovered brain training's transformative impact on her own life and made it her mission to share this widely with everyone. From there, she founded Sens.ai, and the rest is history. If you want to check out the things we discuss in today's episode, the show notes with all the links and resources and good stuff will be at mindbodypeak.com/125. And if you're interested in picking up your own Sens.ai neurofeedback headset, click the link in the description below and use the exclusive code URBAN to save 5% on your order. And by the time you're watching this, you can also check out my YouTube review of Sens.ai, showing you the practicals of how it works, what my session looks like, and everything you need to know, or the written article that I did to accompany that. Both of those will also be in the description of the video and the show notes for this episode. All right, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Team Sens.ai. Paola and Dr. Drew, welcome to Mind Body Peak Performance.
Hi, Nick. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
It's great to have you guys here. And let's begin today with a couple of both of your non-negotiables you've done for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
And that's today in particular?
Today.
Yeah, I mean, I always start my day before checking, my phone. I always do something for my brain. Like in the morning, you're kind of still in this kind of dreamy state, and it's a really nice time for meditative type practices. So I did heart rate variability training, so very heart centered with a gratitude meditation, transcranial photobiomodulation that was like a nice sort of alpha tweak, like tuning up my peak alpha frequency, and then followed by some neurofeedback that was a mix of alpha, gamma, and again tuning up that peak alpha frequency. So that's what I did this morning, all within about a 45-minute total before I looked at my phone.
And for anyone listening in who does not understand any of those words, we will clearly define what each of those mean and why you would want to go about those. Dr. Drew?
So sleep is non-negotiable for me. It's so important to set up your sleep environment and have good sleep hygiene and have a good night of sleep before you start anything the next day. What I did today, I came in and used what I call another acronym here, CVAC is a cyclic variable altitude pod, basically. And I combine that with the good old Sensei, and able to train inside something like that and do HRV, photobiomodulation, and I'll either do one of two programs typically in there. One is focus. It prepares me for the day cognitively, focus-wise. And the other one is deep calm, which is a deep relaxation one that we use. That's like caramel. It's just so sweet.
Yeah, and why inside the CVAC machine?
I think for stacking and time-wise, because if I'm using that, 30 minutes, then I have to go and do neurofeedback for 30 minutes. And in the CVAC, it's increasing vascularity and brain blood flow and better oxygenation of the system. So if we combine those, I think I'm getting a better response cognitively from that.
So basically, you're amplifying the effects of your training.
Yes. And I always do my herbs in the morning. So all the Chinese herbs and acetylcholine and essential fatty acids, piracetam is typically what I'll take in combination.
I didn't tell either of you guys this, but I also did some training this morning. I did some heart coherence, which is like HRV biofeedback. And then after that, I did a focus session. And we will get into what all that means in a few minutes. But can you guys first break down what are brain waves? And we've talked about alpha already. We talked about, I don't know if we talked about it, but beta, theta. People have probably heard these terms, but they might not know what they mean. And then at the same time, how does that play into neurochemistry and neurotransmitters?
Okay, I'll start. I'll start with a layman's approach, and then Dr. Drew can go deep if we want to. So I like to use the ocean analogy when we think about brain waves. So the brain has an electrical nature, and like you're alluding to with the neurochemicals and chemical nature. But if we look at neurons firing, they are creating electrical activity in the brain that we can measure. We can measure it at the scalp. So that's really what we're doing with neurotech devices. And when you hear the term EEG, we're measuring that electrical neural activity. And so the brain waves that you're talking about, and there's five bands, five frequency bands that are defined. They're that oscillation that's happening and has been broken down in spectrum. And they're all happening at the same time, which is something that's important to note, right? We're not exclusively ever like an alpha. Alpha just becomes more dominant. It becomes more powerful. And so there's certain signatures of these five that are as they're combined, one that might be more alpha gamma dominant example, right? So what we're doing is right now, let's say we're mostly in a beta dominant state where our attention is directed outward. We're perceiving our environment with our senses. And when we go to sleep at night, we're at, let's say, at the bottom of the ocean, which is more delta. And then in between, there's all these subtle states that are really powerful and very beautiful that we tend to not be able to tap into with lucidity, right? So if you've ever tried meditation and you sit down for a minute and then you fall asleep, that's us going straight from beta to delta, just because we haven't developed that skill set of navigating the ocean in between. And so from the top to bottom, if we were to go beta, the next level of the ocean would be more alpha. And that's more this relaxed spa-like brainwave, which is actually still very embodied. Think of like hot, cold, baths, right? Your body's kind of tingly, but very relaxed. And then a little bit deeper than that, now we're going into theta. And theta is like a more float tank, right? Like think deeper meditative states. And then we go into the delta. So the one that's missing, the fifth one that's missing there in that analogy is gamma. And gamma is this sort of enigmatic brainwave state that's been detected in people who have meditated for many years. They've done studies on monks and seen very high gamma amplitude and high gamma synchrony. And so gamma is actually the fastest of all the brainwaves. So it's actually higher than beta, but we think of it as being deepest. Like it's actually a bit of a juxtaposition, right? It's the deepest in the ocean, but it's like you've got sunlight in there. So there's a lot of lucidity and awareness with it. And so that gamma state was one that's very, very creative, right? Um, I don't know if you want to add to that, Drew.
Yeah, the only thing I'd probably add to it, gamma is, as far as I'm concerned, consciousness. It brings about consciousness, and it brings about these disparate facts of, if you see a red ball and it's bouncing, and you have to correlate that with the color red, and it's a ball and it's doing these things. So gamma really binds that together. Also gives us a memory function too. So that if you have one of the things that we do in a telephone is 7 digits, right? And that nests in what we call theta. So gamma nests in these frequencies, and theta is about 7 cycles per second, 47. But in those, gamma elicits this fact that we can actually memorize things in those 7 digits, and it brings about that. And some people could do much more, but that's why I think when inherently we tend to have a 7 number gap or a limit that we do for memorization. But gamma is one of those aha eureka frequencies, and it really binds together the memory from the hippocampus.
So the way I've thought about it, I don't know how accurate this is, but I generally thought that the faster the frequency, the less restorative. For example, if you go down into the delta when you're sleeping, that's what allows a lot of the different biochemical processes to occur, and so the body can repair and regenerate. And maybe with the exception of gamma, I had the idea that perhaps as you go higher, faster frequency, that's less restorative, and that can be depleting of the brain's resources, such as when you're in a beta dominant state indefinitely.
Typically, beta will, if you're doing focus and concentration and analytical thought and problem solving, all the things that go along with beta, can be draining over time. Alpha is much more regenerative, and that's why meditation actually brings about that regenerative nature. Theta taps much more into the subconscious, and it's in that dreamlike state. And I don't know if I call it regenerative, but it releases a lot of trauma in that lower frequency, and that can be very regenerative in that sense, since we're not holding on to that anymore. Delta is a pure physiologic aspect that really taps into hormones and cycles, and what we call glymph or brain lymph, and pumping the brain of getting out the stuff that we need to get out, and bringing in new nutrients and blood flow and oxygen.
Nick, I think it's a good point that you're bringing up, because it's really like when we approach this in Sensei, it was really about creating a flexible and balanced brain, right? You don't want to always be in beta any more than you always want to be in theta, right? So we're trying to help people who are maybe more analytically centered to be more heart centered, and vice versa, right? So people can be more active in the world the way they want to be, depending on the task at hand.
Yeah, I was about to ask why you guys went about this entire mission and bringing this product to life. Like, what is the benefit of getting more granularity in your ability to access different brain states?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can sort of start with how I came across neurotechnology. So when I first met Drew many years ago, it was when he was working on my brain. And that was because I'd had a motor vehicle accident, and so I was in a healing journey. But in that process, I discovered that it actually improved my meditation practices. Like I was actually able to more consistently, more precisely target different meditation styles, right? Where before I hadn't quite understood the nuances of the different meditation styles, and now I realize it's been mapped, it's been studied. So that was one aspect, but it also really helped me for I was running another startup at the time, and it helped me in my cognitive performance. And so I realized that depending on the type of brain training that you were doing, you could actually be learning to shift gears, and it could actually help different aspects of your life. And that's when my eureka moment was about, everybody needs this, right? So it was about, how do we make this smaller? How do we make this less expensive, and efficacious at scale? Right. So that includes building in safety measures and, different personalization aspects. So that's the why, and I guess a little bit of the philosophy of how we approached it.
What is it that you can get out of brain training? Like, say I go in and I have these specific goals regarding performance, or I suffered a TBI, say from playing rugby or American football. Like, what are the different things that it can do? Like, what's the gamut of possibility with neurofeedback and brain training?
Well, that's a very broad thing that we could do. We can take you to the peaks of these eureka type states, the happiness of gamma, the insights that come along with it. We can help you focus better in certain frequencies where we have the beta frequencies. You can help the attention centers in the brain really bring themselves together to focus. Alpha is much more of a meditation state, but it's also necessary for any peak performance. If your alpha isn't up there, if it's not bursting right before you throw that rugby ball, or kick the rugby ball, or throw a baseball or something like that, or even while you're driving, you're going to fail typically, because it's an error alert, because the alpha is not there to really promote the smooth flow. And theta can be high or low depending. And if that's not regulated properly, you're going to either have attention issues, or you're going to have trauma issues. And delta is so important for sleep. And if you're not regulated in delta, you're not going to sleep well. And that impacts so many people. How many people impacted just nightly because of sleep issues?
Yeah. So when we started looking at this, because it is so broad, it is so wide in terms of, who can it be used for? We looked at it like, well, the ultimate goal is really one of consciousness evolution. Okay. So it's a very big, kind of hairy goal. So how can we help people to move from more of the me centered, like self-care, maybe evolve into a we sort of consciousness, and into an all sort of consciousness. And we figured that's really what we need to do, right? What we as a species need. But the first thing to do is to kind of meet people where they are today. So even if I say I'm looking for peak performance, but I'm actually having pretty crappy sleep this week, I got to deal with that first. That's important, and it's more critical to deal with today. And so we actually start with what we call an assessment, right? So that people can actually focus on one thing at a time and go from that point A to point B on sleep first, before moving on to, let's say, creativity, or moving on to deeper states of meditation. Um, I guess the app is structured to be personalized and to be a journey that goes with you, because life, is, you're going to have to adapt to life. We can't really control the external conditions, but we wanted something like a coach, like a brain coach, like having Drew, right, like on your shoulder, like kind of whispering to you, hey, you should do a little beta today, right? Like that's sort of the idea of Sensei, is how can we make this so that people have that personalized experience and get what they need during that time. But we also didn't want to structure it too much to be a la carte. So as much as there's a lot of breadth of programs, we wanted to structure missions. And so the concept of missions is, if we were doing a study, or we were doing, like we were trying to help one person at a time, and we wanted to help them, let's go back to sleep. What's the quickest way for us to get them to better sleep? And so let's get them to focus on these specific training programs between these weeks, and let's see if we can make like a big dent in that, and move them along the journey.
That was one thing I noticed very quickly. At first, I was concerned that, like, how am I going to be able to choose between all these? Because after I finish the intro mission, you get to choose your next mission. And like, wow, these all sound good. Like, how do I choose? But then once you actually start the mission, it guides you and you don't have to worry and like spend 15 minutes just choosing which mission you want to do to begin with.
Absolutely. And some folks like lately, and I mean since COVID, we've become so aware of like brain fog and stress management issues and things like that. And so I think it's important for us to just acknowledge, like, even as peak performers, we have these sort of blocks right now, and there should be no shame in dealing with that. And you can deal with it privately as well, right? So Sensei will kind of guide you through that step by step.
I think it's pretty clear there's a like foundational electromagnetic nature of the brain and of the body as like first depicted by I think his name's Robert Becker in his book The Body Electric, but then in a lot of science since then. But what about the chemistry side? How is there any interplay between working on the brain's electromagnetic signature and frequency bands and then also like the neurotransmitters or the neurochemicals? Dr. Drew mentioned a minute ago taking an acetylcholine supplement, and that's on the chemical side. But like, is there any interplay between the two?
There is. Neurochemicals, are very different from the neuroelectrical setup, the neurons firing, right? The neurotransmitters are communication molecules, and they can be inhibitory. They can be, they play a role in motivation or pleasure, or mood regulation, attention, learning, and memory. And each one does a different thing. But what we find with neurofeedback in any form of photobiomodulation aspect, it starts making these neurotransmitters more efficient. So you don't need as much to get a lot further. And are the neurotransmitters important? Absolutely. They're the chemical communicators between the synapse aspects. But you also want them to be very efficient. And what we find with neurofeedback, it makes them much more efficient. So you don't need as much to get a lot longer. And they, in that utilization, what happens is that they're able to kind of be in waiting rather than using them all and then to be depleted, and then you have a refractory period or a period of time it takes to recover, and it's going to bring down recovery times tremendously just because of that.
Drew, Paula already described her background a little bit, but obviously you've been involved in this for quite some time. So will you share a bit about your backstory?
I got into neurofeedback in the mid 90s and was able to train with some of the most incredible people that brought about neurofeedback into what we know as what it is today. Barry Sturman and Siegfried and Sue Othmer, Joel Lubar, Joe Camilla, some of these greats out there that really set the stage for what I do right now. And I became addicted to how to change the brain without medication. And it worked so well. And I saw so many shifts. And I did pediatrics mainly for about 5 years before I went into more of a general practice. And then that evolved into a peak performance practice. And being in San Diego, where I'm at right now, I get to work with everything from fighter pilots to Navy SEALs to Major League Baseball and like football. But it really brought about the aspect of with these peak brains and how they operate. How can we affect greater legions of leadership out there too? And that's where I think Paul and I really hit it off as far as those conversations bringing about these peak states for leadership and coherence between hearts and brains, and how we can move along as in a society to bring about balance rather than this disassociation and disembarkment of our connection.
Yeah, I love that. And one thing that came up when I was first researching this, I love the potential of neurofeedback and brain training. And there is research showing that it's as great as you make it sound. And at the same time, I was looking at like how to actually do this. And it seems like it was only available to the upper echelon of society that have the most expendable resources, because at like a really high-end clinic, a week of like guided neurofeedback can be 5 figures. And for your average population, that's just not accessible. And so when you have a system like Sensei, it's taking that cost way, way down, and at the same time allowing you to accrue the benefits every day if you choose to, or at least multiple times a week. You're not just going in there for a 1 week period and then perhaps repeating again the next year if you're lucky. So it's nice that you can both bring the cost down and make it more accessible on an ongoing basis.
Yes, that's right, for sure. Because I mean, I've done clinics like that, and then I was left with, the effects lasted for quite some time, but I wanted to take it to the next level at home. And with meditation alone and breath work alone, I was unable to do it. And I tried doing it with the devices that were available on the market, and then that's where we thought, okay, there's a gap here. But to do it right, it's going to take us some time, and it did. It took us 5 years, but definitely that's the idea, is that you could, if you have a daily practice with it, you can take it a lot further.
So will you either of you guys describe what is like biofeedback? I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, and we talked about like what it can do for you, but like what is it happening that's happening in the brain? How are you creating the cues to make this change? What's the science of it all?
What we want to do biofeedback wise, and all it means is we're getting biological feedback, right? We're detecting a wave, an EEG or electroencephalography. This electrical pulse coming out, we're detecting it and providing feedback back to the system. So much like Pavlov did with the dogs, and if you remember that story about how he conditioned the dogs to associate a ringing bell with with food, with a bowl of gruel, and every time you rang the bell, once that came up, their physiology would respond. And we do the same with neurons. Um, when a person receives feedback during neurofeedback, it's signaling the brain that particular pattern of neuroactivity is good or desired. We're giving them a reinforcement for that. And then we pull back the reinforcement when it doesn't meet the criteria of what we're looking for.
The way I think of it too is there's neuroplasticity, right? That we're aware we can change our brains very much like we can change our bodies with training, and then there's operant conditioning, and that's what Dr. Drew is referring to. And we can think of it too like when you're teaching a dog to shake a paw, right? So he's actually taking an action, and then you're rewarding that action. And so what we're doing is we're reading the brain waves when we're doing neurofeedback training. And when we're doing the heart rate variability training, we're reading the heart rate and converting that mathematically into heart rate variability. And so those biosignals, we change them into audio and visual cues, right? So you're basically, you are engaging with your biosignals in this audio visual experience. Sometimes it's just audio because it's a closed eye, depending on the brainwave. But this whole idea of being able to interact in real time with those signals is how you learn. So very much like when someone's coaching you, it's not real time. Someone's like, "Oh, you should swing that this way," right? Like twist your body a little bit. And so it's a little bit, lag in the feedback, but it's that same idea of feedback. I did something, someone helped me tweak it, gave me better information, but we're doing it right with our biosignals. So it's much more accelerated learning.
And this is because the brain doesn't have any external facing sensors per se. So you're putting an electrode, an EEG on the brain, you're reading the brain waves. When it dips out of what you're training for, you get some kind of feedback or cue, and then the brain recognizes that and doesn't want that. And then it shifts its electrical activity towards what it thinks you're looking for. And when it goes into the right band, then it gets a rewarding cue. Say, in this case, the software plays a louder sound or a more vibrant sound. And when it gets that, then the brain knows, okay, this is what I'm actually training to maintain right now.
Yes, and what's really interesting about it is that it's the feedback is faster than the speed of analytical thought. And so one of the most common questions people ask, like, consistently, I think Drew agrees, is what should I be thinking about, right? And during neurofeedback, it's like not, it's like always happens. And we try and explain in many different ways, but the question still comes up. And so it's counterintuitive, but it's about not thinking about it. It's actually feeling into the feedback, into the sounds and the visuals. And so you're right. So we would, like in our system, we've associated certain instruments with certain wavelengths, right? So you can change them, but purposefully, we have a higher sort of flute, I believe, that's associated with like the gamma sounds. Right. Then there's like a bit of a lower note. The trombone is associated with the alpha sounds, and then a deeper bass associated with the theta. And so so now when you're training, you just need to feel like, I like the trombone. I'm I want to hear more trombones. And then it if you get into a deeper state with it, it's I and the trombone are meshing. Now it's the meditation is the trombone. And that is how the trombone sounds. Suddenly the volume goes up higher. The trombones become more frequent, right? And as long as that's pleasant for you, that will feel like a reward, and the brain will just follow. The brain will just know what to do.
I like to think of this training as like the mirror for your brain that you never had. So like it can show areas in which you're unable to access otherwise. And by training those, all of a sudden, that neural pathway becomes more active and the brain can access that even when you're not using Sensei or any other system.
You're yeah, it's 100% right. It's one of the best analogies that I've heard as well, that I really like, because it's about developing that self-awareness. And then with that, you can start doing the self-regulation. So often people talk about neurofeedback as self-awareness and self-regulation. And I think the term mind mirror was coined. Was that Anna Wise, I think?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Cadwell. Yeah. And that's the key for all of this. So we don't want a headset on all the time. We want to be able to turn on these states of consciousness when we want, rather than them controlling us in states of, whether it's anger or flow or happiness. We should be able to control how we.
One thing that you guys have mentioned, actually Paola has mentioned it, is that Sensei is more than just neurofeedback. It's multiple different modalities of brain training and potentially cognitive enhancement. But you mentioned HRV biofeedback or heart coherence, which are the same thing. So that's a whole separate modality outside of neurofeedback.
Yeah, I mean, going back to what Drew just said there, we want people to be able to control their state, right? So we want the system to be teaching you how to do it without building a dependency. So that's why we talk a lot about neurofeedback, because that is the core of it. That is the beating heart of Sensei, right? So because that is really about training new mental habits, very much like meditation, but we're doing it in a way that's accelerated and measured. So that's why we talk about neurofeedback. But we've added the heart rate variability training because that brings into it the body, right? So heart rate variability training, or you could refer to it as heart coherence biofeedback, is really about balancing the nervous system, so the parasympathetic and sympathetic parts of the nervous system, but it's also about bringing into harmony the brain and the heart. And so it accomplishes this very powerful sort of harmonizing that really puts the brain, we can see it going into like an alpha state. So um, it's a very embodied state. It's a very primed state for neurofeedback. And so we like the combination of the two. And part of that, Dr. Drew had mentioned, I remember you told me a story once about how when you were doing some I think it was some Zen monks, you were doing some EEG readings on them, and that they were laughing because they thought he'd forgotten the heart, right? And that he thought the mind was just the brain, and the mind is so much more than the brain, right? The mind is also in the heart, right? It's also in our bodies. And so that's why, and Drew said from then on, always train the heart as well. And so we thought that was a very powerful modality to include.
I find it's the perfect start to a training session. I will do just sometimes as little as 7 minutes of heart coherence training. And it's essentially just controlled breathing, controlled like specific inhalation and exhalation periods. And I don't know how much is like customized based on like my current HRV, and how much of that is just like this is consistent throughout all humans. But I find it in just a few minutes, I can go about my day and be feeling completely leveled and clear-headed and ready to go.
It's actually, I think it's one of the most powerful aspects of it. It's an immediate mood shift as well. It's I found it very powerful that way. And I would, even though we have it at 7 minutes, I would recommend like 20 minutes. It puts you into a very, very different state. So we are using the heart sensor throughout to optimize and personalize throughout that, which is what's unique about Sensei compared to, let's say there's a lot of free apps out there where you can do, breathing, resonance breathing, but it would be something you would program, right? You would say, what's a standard one that they use, Drew? Is it like sort of more like 4 or 5 seconds in, 6 seconds out?
Yeah, typically you want 4.5 to 7.5 breaths per minute, and it depends on you're in and out, and everyone's different. Some people breathe longer, slower. Some people require a little bit faster for that too.
So what we'll do is we personalize it each time, but we're also learning what your range is. And so we'll try and make it quite precise, right? So it's like 5.25 or whatever it is. But yeah, right now it's always using the pulse oximeter.
So let's break down how exactly the system is working. You're wearing a helmet. Actually, I have it in front of me. I have the case, and inside, do you guys call it a helmet or a headset?
We say headset.
Headset, yeah. I guess that makes sense. It's right here. You put a couple drops of water on the electrodes. You put it on, you make it fit snugly, and then you choose a mission to train. What's going on from there?
Well, yeah, I mean, first I'll just say on the headset, we have, on the right cup, there's a ground. So if you see some of the padding there, that's a ground sensor. Really important to eliminate noise around you. So that needs to touch skin. On the left hand side ear cup, there's the pulse oximeter that's looking at the heart rate. And then on the blue part we call the flex cap, on top you'll see there's some lights. There's some LED like lights that are specialized for photobiomodulation. Those are those little nubs, and those are using 810 nanometer wavelengths. Yeah, that's the transcranial photobiomodulation, which is penetrating the skull with certain frequencies. And so we do frequencies all the way from 1 hertz to 1024 hertz, depending on what the program is. And there will be more programs to come. And so we talk about the functions as boost, train, and assess. So boost is those transcranial photobiomodulation boosts or sessions. And what's unique there is that because we have the electrodes, we're able to look at the band and look at where you're resonating at that time within that band. So, for example, if we're boosting alpha, we can actually see, oh, you're at 9.5 today, or you're at 10.5 hertz today, not just stim 10 hertz blindly for everybody. And so then we might stim you right on your resonance frequency, or in some cases, we might tweak it up a little bit. So with alpha in particular, that feels really nice. It kind of gives you a bit of a nootropic effect, right? So that's the prepare boost, which is the one I did this morning. And so that's boost. Train is like we talked about, the HRV training and neurofeedback training, and assess is a different thing that we can tackle later.
No, about that. So those LEDs are very small. Can those actually cause like a measurable shift in brain activity from like, so you say 7 LEDs?
Yeah, 7 LEDs, and it's about 250 milliwatts per centimeter squared, I believe. It's pretty strong. And yeah, and like I was saying, 1 hertz to 1024 hertz. So we've been, looking at that for about, I guess it's like 4 years really, since we had the working prototypes that we could do testing with. And what we found was a big difference in the personalization. So there's people that we would stim at 10 hertz that would have zero effect with the transcranial photobiomodulation. And we realized that once we read their frequency and then stim them there or higher, now we could actually see the entrainment on the EEG. And so that was a big aha for us. And we were, very well already, designed to do that very, very thing, which was personalized.
You might not approve of this, but one thing I love about the boost mode is that you can put it on and you can go about other things that while you're still stationary, like I can go on my computer and knock out some emails while it's working in the background, as opposed to training modes where I have to be completely present, focused on exactly what it is that I'm training for.
Right. You're right. I don't approve, Nick, but no, it's, yeah, I mean, we're multitasking beings, right? That's the way it is. In an ideal world, yeah, absolutely. People would be doing the meditations with the boosts, because I think we talk about it like the content, right, is actually very important. It will accelerate the boosting objectives if you're doing the content that aligns with that. So we have, for example, let's say you're stimming gamma, right, which is the expand boost, and you're doing a gratitude meditation track with it. It will be a different experience than if you're on social media or working during a gamma boost. Would you agree, Drew?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and also, if you're going to do something like that, I would read a hardcover book, or just a physical book. You'll get a lot more out of it. Like if I stim in focus frequency, and I'll actually read a book, and reading a paragraph will become easier for me during that time. But the meditations along with it are meant to bring the mind into intention about its attention to that, and it's training rather than, hey, I'm taking a supplement and I can do anything in the background.
And it's a distinction too between open eye and closed eye, where I think with open eye you could do a little bit more multitask. I think with the closed eye, it's purposefully closed eye, and this was part of us, being very cautious of rolling this out, in mass, right? So we want to make sure that these are stabilizing, nurturing experiences, and people don't have any, headaches or anything like that with it. It's all very safe and non-invasive, but we want to make sure that the experience is actually optimal.
And also, I have several other brain stim devices, and they can be powerful, but they're definitely not customized or personalized to my current brain state. So I like that you guys have that baked into this device. And not only does that function exist, but it's also personalized at the same time.
Yeah, it's such a big feature to bring that about, and over time, um, your your measurements may change and optimize, and we've seen that over time with a few people. You're not a stagnant being. You're not a robot. Thank goodness.
Why'd you guys choose to use light to stimulate the brain rather than either isochronic tones, binaural beats, or like haptic vibrations, something along those lines?
We tried a lot of things in the beginning, but photobiomodulation provides energy for the neurons. It can go directly into very specific areas of the brain, like with binaural beats or isochronic. You're putting in information right into the ears, and if you have a lot of people have auditory processing issues, so it's not as effective as people think. I think the measurement came out like 20 or 30% effective for binaural beats. And it depends on the frequency and what state you're in, but you're also putting that information in and hoping it goes to the right place. With the photobiomodulation, we can put it exactly where we want it at the frequencies we want. and provide energy for those neurons, right? So it goes in, it provides that, the ATP cycle kicks up, and you're able to produce those frequencies.
Yeah, it has the benefit of impacting the mitochondria directly, and then um, triggering that ATP cycle. So, and creating more oxygenation. So that already makes it this great primer for brain training and has these additional benefits. And it's also non-invasive. Like, so even compared to, like you mentioned, binaural beats, but let's say compared to like other types of electrical or electromagnetic stimulation, the light therapy is much more non-invasive.
Yeah. And you're not putting electrodes on different parts of your head and face and shoulders and neck and everything either.
Right. And in the brain, a big part of our brain operation is brain blood flow too. So the what we call hemodynamic effects, right? So it's going to increase blood flow, um, which also increases oxygen going into those areas too. And it increases vascular health. There was a big paper that just came out about that too. And these vascular cells are critical in maintaining the blood-brain barrier and the overall cerebral health too. Metabolically, we're really tapping into this, and the stimulation of the cytochrome C oxidase. It's a key enzyme in the mitochondrial respiratory chain. So this can lead to that increased ATP or adenosine triphosphate production, and it's the primary energy in the molecule in the cells.
One other part of Sensei that caught my attention right off the bat, and is actually the reason I pre-ordered it. What was it? Must have been around April of 2022. Was that you guys also have a whole like functional brain assessment module built into that? Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I first started looking at doing like third party studies, and any of the studies that Drew shared with me in the early days too, I realized a lot of them were based on event related potential measurements. So these are called ERPs, and this is the standard sort of methodology, like mathematics behind measuring the speed of brain's processing. And so this is how in labs they would say whether something was efficacious in helping the brain perform better. And so when I looked at that, I thought, well, why couldn't we just do that? Why couldn't we just put that into the headset? And so that was actually something that I added more recently, actually, like in the last maybe 2-3 years. I think we were already on Indiegogo at the time, and I was like, oh, we gotta go full out with the ERPs, because we wanted to be able to share people's progress with them, right? So what I would have wanted, I always found it quite anticlimactic with neurofeedback in really knowing if I had made progress, right? Because it's very difficult to compare the power of, let's say, my gamma waves with your gamma waves. It's a very subjective thing. There's the your hair, the skull thickness. There's all kinds of things, and people just have different amplitudes. So really, how am I going to be able to track actual progress? And because I'm investing time, right? And so I thought this is something that we should be transparent about, but also it helps us to learn and improve the system. So we decided to add not just auditory ERPs, which would have been much easier, but to add a visual component. And so you see we have that controller that looks a lot like a Nintendo Switch. And so there's a button that's left and a right button. And so what we're able to measure with that is pretty much the speed of the brain processing during a task. So the headset with our custom electrodes is actually measuring while you're doing that test on that controller. And so, as much as we use the ERP methodology, so the mathematics and the process for that, we don't present clinical information, right? So we're not presenting like ERPs, but we are presenting information that anyone who's into self-optimization would find useful. So you can see when you notice, let's say there's arrows, right? So when you notice there's a left arrow, you're aware of it, right? When you start classifying it as something important to pay attention to, that's another measurement. When you actually decide I'm going to push a button, there's another measurement. That's the speed of processing. We can measure the your accuracy. We can measure your reaction time, the actual physical reaction time, and even your recognition of when you've committed an error, and then your adaptation to that, which is fascinating. And so we help you see that information and track that over time, and pretty shortly we'll be able to help you benchmark that within our community. And we've done that in a way that's novel because it's mobile, but it's also been done to 1 millisecond precision, which is a bit of a technical feat. So we think people will appreciate that.
Yeah, that's one thing I love that you guys do is you really are gamifying all of this because yes, it's cutting edge. Yes, it's very useful, but it's only as useful as you're willing to do it. And by gamifying it, by adding leaderboards, social leaderboards, and personal leaderboards, you make it much more engaging and almost like an alternative, a fun alternative to video games.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the gamification, the games industry, they've done some great work in figuring out what motivates us, right? So we're trying to leverage that for, games for good, right? Like, how do we actually improve ourselves and leverage tech to make us more truly human versus the opposite way, which it can obviously be used for as well.
One question I got from my community is how are you guys able to really personalize everything without using and getting the data from a personal brain mapping, which can be another layer that most people aren't willing to do. It's expensive, it takes time, and a lot of the people I've talked to said that that's absolutely necessary. So you guys must have some trick up your sleeve here.
So yeah, I mean, a brain map, I guess, is more clinical, right? So the objective of the brain map is to measure your brain activity as compared to an average. So they're comparing you to a database. They look at standard deviations, statistical analysis based on standard. So I think that's still incredibly useful. It's especially useful if you have maybe a concussion, or some sort of pathology. I think it's quite necessary. So how are you different from the norm? What we're training is very different than comparing to norm. We're trying to optimize you holistically. And so there is definitely a lot of things that you can be seen in your brainwave patterns, in your heart rate variability patterns, in your ERPs. There's a lot of information qualitatively that you can share that's indicative of what recommendations we can make for missions, for example.
I forget that you guys ask the qualitative information too about like personal, like what your lifestyle's looking like. And then also before each session, asking about how are you feeling in terms of energy, in terms of happiness, focus, like calmness.
Yeah, well, the surveys are very important. And also, when we're doing brain maps, because I do them at my office, I'm looking for any pathophysiology. Typically, I'm looking for something. So they're coming in with big issues. It's not just for meditation. It's not just for attention. So it's the difference between going to an Olympic training center and going to a rehab center for, like a knee or a shoulder or something like that. It's ours is not medical based in that sense. I think, in the future, we'll have a lot more data and be able to provide a lot more refined information to the brain. But what we're doing right now is phenomenal.
And because you guys collect the qualitative and the quantitative for each person, you understand like the baseline and then how they're progressing as they train so you can adapt the program. And I say you meaning your algorithms can adapt the training program as they go.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing we're doing that's unique there, and back to personalization, is we're taking, how there's, when you're doing neurofeedback, there's a baselining period in the beginning, right? And we're very transparent. We're baselining. That baselining period is sort of like how you come in to your day. This is you right now, sort of regular, right? So if you want to go straight into meditation during the baselining, totally cool. I do, just to make the training that much more difficult, really, right? But we're taking baselines across multiple sessions. So that's pretty unique, because we can do that because we're at home with you and we know that it's always you. And so that helps us to know, are you having a good day? Are you having a bad day? Can we nudge you further? Do we have to take it easy on you today? Like that's another level of that personalization.
So when I answer those surveys, you're actually like adapting my session based on the way I'm currently feeling, or I report that I'm currently feeling.
Yes. I mean, if you don't want to, then you can hit skip too. But yeah, but if you report, yeah, for sure, that's very, very important information for us.
One thing I never actually looked into is what I'm supposed to be doing during these sections. And so I've been meditating, and I guess I've just been hoping that's the right thing to do. But I also noticed a strange pattern that if I think about something, like I let my mind wander, I don't necessarily lose whatever I'm training. I don't necessarily drop into an unfavorable brain state, but also like sometimes I do. It seems like it's not correlated. Like my thought isn't necessarily correlated with the training outcome.
Now, the better you pay attention, uh, your intention and attention during the session, which is meditation, is really attention on a single thing, right? And what we're doing is providing that feedback to that. Most thoughts don't interfere with that, but the more distracted you get, the less attention you are on task and the less information you're letting through. Because of that default mode network, this network that kind of works when we close our eyes, if that's busy doing other things, you're not getting all the information you can out of training. And are you getting some? Absolutely. But you're not getting, you're just not performing the way you could. If you brought that back to the sound, brought that back to the visual, and just stay focused on that.
Yeah, so we can see the mind wandering in the spectrum. And, it's quite different from individual to individual, right? So that baselining period takes that into account. So we won't hold you to the same standard as, like a monk, let's say, who's meditating all the time. Like, right? So there's variation, and we understand that. And so, but we'll try and bring it down, right? So the system will be gentle when it can, and then it will nudge you when it thinks you can rise to the occasion. So it's a bit of a nuanced approach.
You're right. Whenever my mind wanders while I'm meditating, I do bring it back onto my breath or the audio, whatever it is that I'm focusing on my training. But then I have noticed that if I'm in a noisy environment, for example, that makes training so much harder. It's very difficult to maintain any like coherence. And I was wondering if that's a good thing, as it's like putting on extra weight on the baseball bat before I swing. It makes training harder, or if that's actually like worsening my training. And I have a feeling it's the latter, where it's actually like decreasing the quality of my training and not just making it harder, which could be a net positive.
Time into it. Let's say you're just beginning. Get in a quiet environment. Learn these states. Once you're adept at these, then you could start stepping into other things around you. Whether the guy's throwing the tennis ball at you, or there's a barista breaking a glass over in the corner. These things, if you can maintain your state during that, that's the key. That's what you want. But build up slowly to that.
Well, so what are the common use cases? Why are people turning to Sensei? We've already talked about like athletic performance and like recovery from certain like brain impairments, like brain fog. It can improve sleep, especially the deep calm in the evening for me, like, works very well just to put me into a deeply relaxed state. But then also like for gaming, when people need to improve like their hand-eye coordination and their reaction speed and all that, what's the gamut there of use cases?
So as you know, it's gamified, so it unlocks. So let's say at the me level, the self-care level, you kind of touched on it. There's um after the assessment, emissions will be recommended, and it could be sleep based, it could be brain fog based, it could be attention based, or stress management. And so that's sort of the basics of what is at the me level. But generally, again, with the ocean analogy, we're kind of creating a level of resilience. So we're doing a lot of alpha, beta, SMR training at that very initial stage, creating the resilience that we can then leap off from to then do some more meditative stuff, whether it's mindfulness or before we get into anything that has theta or anything that has gamma, right? We create that base resilience, and partly it's to build the skill set. So until you've done the focus training, right, which is that beta and SMR training, until you've done that, it's going to be very difficult to meditate, right? So people who want to, get into meditative stuff, well, there's just a piece there that will really help you to make that leap, which is that focus training. And then with the alpha training, generally what we're doing is we're building that inner calm, right? So that's useful in all those various things I just mentioned, whether it's in focus training or it's in sleep or brain fog, etc. So we do that, and we do the calm heart, which is again that nervous system balancing. So that's the beginning of it. And then in terms of breadth, then we can go into creative insight states, mindfulness states, clarity, which is the gamma brainwave training, and then there's concentration, which is more of a focused attention, single pointed focus, more Tibetan style meditative training. Those are all at the next layer of it. And then there's more layers on top. And now we start getting into more mixes of the frequencies, but also synchrony, right? So getting all of those brain waves, if you think of them like different instruments in a symphony, getting them all to play the same song in the same synchronized timing. And so now it starts to sound more beautiful. It starts to be more efficient as a system.
That's a really important point, and I totally forgot about that I wanted to jump in and go straight into training gamma because that's the brainwave pattern that excites me the most. And I know with a lot of other systems, they let you do that, but there can be potential issues, or at least it won't necessarily be as effective if you don't have like the foundational alpha and coherence and resilience built up from training the other states.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's why we took a systematic approach. We kind of rethought the whole thing from first principles. My co-founder, and he's my CTO as well, Corey, and we come at it from a techie perspective, right? My education is as an electrical engineer, and we haven't been in the neurofeedback field or the neuroscience field for a long time. So we had really fresh eyes on it and just questioned all the assumptions. And part of that was, how do we, to systematize it was really a matter of how do we make this the most efficacious for people's investment of their time as possible? How do we get there faster? And it's still time, understanding the brainwaves interface with each other, right? So you'd have to get good at beta training before you could be good at theta training, this sort of stuff. And then let's just take our time with it because we want to springboard people to the end, right? And it's not most efficacious for them to cherry pick programs as they go. There's a more efficacious way.
Yeah, I found when I first started out, the calm training was incredibly frustrating because I expected that because I've been meditating for a decade or so, that I would jump in and have an easy time, but not quite. And then about 10 sessions in, I started really getting the hang of calm. But then I went over to focus, and my very first focus session, just like that, I had it. It was very easy for me. So I was like, okay, I probably have, like, it's easy, and I probably have a beta brainwave dominant state already. And then a gamma was also easy. And I'm like, well, I probably should be focusing more on the calm side because I need to establish a like stronger baseline there, and probably less on the focus if it's coming so easily.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
probably why you feel really good with the deep calm setting too.
Yeah, I thought deep calm was only for sleep. And then after talking to Paola, she made me realize that if this is really helping you like come into your work more level-headed, your relationships more level-headed, and just show up better, you don't need to just use this at night. You can use it during the daytime also.
It's true. And we've had so much good feedback on Deep Calm at that program in particular, which is just like a lower alpha, that we're probably going to put it into the main star map. Like, so it is available for people outside of the sleep mission. So stay tuned. It's on the roadmap, on the long list of things we're doing to improve the app.
It's one of my favorite. The analogy I would take is here in San Diego, you get out on a board and go surfing for a bit. And when you're done, you just have that deep calm, just that flow, the dude setting, I call it. And that's the same effect of the Deep Calm program too.
Yeah. As a athlete and a kiteboarder, I can relate. And that is a feeling that I chase often because it makes like the rest of the day just like flow and go by so easily that, yeah, I now understand that. And it's a difficult situation that you guys are in where you want to communicate what this does for most people. So it's clear like why you would train with this. But then at the same time, without excluding the possibilities of it working differently for different people.
And it's good for people to have, in this time of there's so many gadgets out there, and everybody, like myself included, I've been drawn to like the latest sort of shiny thing. We don't want people to have a sensei device and just put it on the shelf, right? We want people to have a very clear intention. I am going to put in the time to get the most out of it. It's a very fully stacked neural stack already, that can have a broad application in my life. And I'm going to put, some investment of time in this, for the journey. Right. So that's the kind of commitment that we're looking for our community.
Yeah, I think this is probably the best brain health, brain performance device I've ever come across. So thank you guys for creating it. And at the same time, if someone has one or they're picking one up and they want to, as we've talked about several times, amplify the results to do more, to get better effects, whether that's like stronger effects or it's faster or like more neuroplasticity from them. Do you guys have any like nootropic stacks or exercise modalities you like or anything else?
I'm sure Drew does, but before he does, I do want to say sometimes people don't realize that there's meditations in there as well. So as much as there's the tech part that we've talked about, with the boosts, the meditation, adding the meditation tracks to the boosts will really help amplify the effects. So that's the content part. What do you think, Drew? What would you stack with it?
Nutrient wise, I have my go-tos. I use a lot of Wizard Science, the Neural RX, uh, Utopia from Biooptimizers. I do their stack. Yeah, exactly. Paracetam is my favorite. Everyone has a different racetam they may like, whether it's aniracetam or piracetam or any of the more stimulatory racetams. Omega-3s, adaptogens, lion's mane is a huge one at night for me. And creatine, I'll use a lot. And then the Chinese herbs is needed specifically for me. But you start stacking those things and they work well. You get your sleep, you get your sun, you get your micronutrients, the minerals are very essential too. Tried peptides before, but I haven't seen as much of a shift with those. Inflammation is shifted, like if you're using BPC 157. I really like that in combination.
Have you used any of the neuropeptides like C-Link or C-Max or Dihexa or any of those?
I've had clients use those. I don't prescribe them, but they have been using them and they really like those.
Yeah, I think consistency, like the basics of health and wellness, as you just mentioned, boring, I know, but they're also so important. And if you're not sleeping well, your neurofeedback isn't going to be nearly as effective. And if you're not moving at all, getting any form of movement will make a huge difference. And then after that, like getting your nutrients and those, and then like as the final layer in the cake, for example, you could add some nootropics and targeted nutrients and get better effects.
Yeah. And it's actually, nice segue to one thing we have coming up in our roadmap, which is we're going to have a community. And so Dr. Mark Atkinson and Dr. Drew Pierson here are going to be running that community. I think it's going to be on Mighty Networks. That's what it looks like right now. But it'll be called the Superconscious Collective. And it's a place for these sorts of conversations around supplements and all the other things in life that are not the Sensei headset to help you optimize around it, and make sure that you're leveraging it as best as you can and optimizing your whole self. Right. So we have the two best doctors I know running that. So I hope the community enjoys that.
Yeah, that's the community aspect is going to be huge. And like the social leaderboards too, that's also helpful. But like having more people talking about this kind of thing, I'm really looking forward to that. We'll start to wind this one down. Are there any topics that you guys feel are important to cover that we haven't talked about yet?
Could be up and coming things. So one of the, I mean, we're always optimizing the app. Like our small but mighty team is very active and busy. So you might have noticed a lot of updates as we go and roll out. So one as an example, on the signal check thing, maybe an interesting thing to mention. We noticed that a lot of folks that were in, like, let's say in apartment buildings, maybe older buildings, were having more EMF problems, and so that's something that we've recently adapted for and sorted through. Right, so because our digital signal processing, which means we're looking at the EEG. And the EEG is this tiny, 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 like microvolt signal, right? So it's like, I think it's, if we were going to look at a double A battery, that's like 1.5 volts roughly. We're looking at 500,000 times the size of the EEG like signal. It's that small. So for us to be able to decipher that from eye blinks, the EMF, a jaw clench, all of that. It's a lot of digital signal processing, right? It's a lot of mathematics. And so we use a type of mathematics which is called wavelet math, which is more precise on timing. And we actually are doing that throughout the session. And so you'll see pop-ups if we lose signal, because we decided early on that philosophically we were going to be very transparent about that and never train noise, right? So we'll just stop. We'll tell you. But then through that process, you're kind of learning and going, oh, okay, so I can't be like chewing gum during this. Oh, okay, I won't do that, right? Because we don't want you to waste your time either. So there's been adaptations on that, and I think you'll see like improvements that have already been made on that front. And I think that's just really important to just call out. From a roadmap perspective, one of the things we're really excited about is rolling out group synchrony. So that's an area of interest. It's an area of research. It's something we're really passionate about. Drew, myself, and the team, and so that is coming in the near term. We'll probably start with 2 people. Something that we talked about. We kind of teased in Indiegogo, so that is coming imminently.
And back to what you were saying before, the issue I see if you're training with a really large quantity of electrosmog EMFs in your environment is that it's all of a sudden very difficult for the gear to determine what's your brainwaves and what's the background electromagnetic radiation. And therefore, you might be training and getting very different signals and responses than you would if it wasn't there. Like you might be thinking you're avoiding beta brainwaves and you're actually training beta brainwaves.
Yes, that would be a risk if we weren't doing it the way we were doing it. That's right.
Well, it's been fun hosting you guys so far. I have a couple more questions, but before we get there, how can people connect with you, follow your content and work, and pick up one of these awesome devices for themselves?
Yeah, well, our name is the same as our URL. So it's Sens.ai is how we say it, and it's written Sens.ai. So that's the best place to find us. We also have a YouTube channel where you can learn more about us. I would encourage you to check out our blogs. We have quite a number of blogs that are quite in depth if you're really interested to dive deep with us. And yeah, I guess those are the two main things. I mean, obviously we're on Instagram and Facebook as well, and LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. And I've also done a couple different reviews of this product. I did a written article, which will be in the show notes below, as well as a YouTube video that will be released soon. So stay tuned for that. And I believe that Paula and team set up a code, and that's, I think, Urban, and it'll save them 5% on their order. Now, if there was a worldwide burning of the books, and between the two of you, you get to save the works of 3 teachers, who would you choose and why?
I'll take this. So that's a huge question first, but I think there would be, if I was going to look across the spectrum, I think I would say Nelson Mandela, for his, the way he embodied leadership, right? And really from what we need in this world, and looking forward, it's really about, reconciliation versus retribution, right? It's a very powerful message that he sent. And I look at, the work of Rudolf Steiner, who was the founder of the Waldorf education system. My son went through Waldorf from kindergarten to grade 6, and I think Rudolf Steiner also contributed a lot to biodynamic agriculture and holistic medicine. So I think that was very, very important work. And then the other one that personally was a lot of impact for me spiritually and as a child, really left a mark. It was Paramahansa Yogananda, and so he taught a lot about, divine truth, sort of transcending dogmas, transcending culture, and really about having heartfelt, direct experience versus intellectual understanding of truth, right? And that's really what we're trying to bring forward with Sensei, in that we've purposely gamified it, right, so that it is not pattern recognition with things, it suspends disbelief so that you can have this direct experience. And really that's an inspiration from Paramahansa.
Beautiful. I got a question about the brain networks that Sensei trains and or affects. Can you guys really quickly run through that?
There's a few different ones. So we train along the center line, and along the center line is like 3 major, technically it's a rich club network and that's 12 major networks that all combine, right? And the default mode network, the salient network, and the executive networks are some of the 3 main ones that we really hit. And those hit 80% of how we function. There's some correlation and compensatory mechanisms, with other networks, but those are the main ones that will really come up, especially, frontally in the frontal cingulate, as we call, and the posterior cingulate too. Having these communicate makes all the difference. And as you start meditating and getting into alpha, we'll notice alpha in the back of the brain here, and then we'll see it move forward as you progress and you get better at this. And then that creates a better bridge for synchrony and those exquisite states that you get into where you kind of feel the top of the head kind of pop off. You feel, oh, I'm at 1 right now. And it's an incredible feeling. So as you develop that, the headset really has those areas to stair step you all the way up into those states.
Cool. Well, let's wrap up with one thing that the Sensei tribe doesn't know about each of you.
So as much as I love brain stuff, I also love mountain biking, skiing, hiking, and paddleboarding, and recently started doing pickleball. So
I can relate. I grew up on a mountain biking mountain, and I do all those, and pickleball has recently, as of the last 2 years, come into my hobbies.
Awesome. Okay.
I think for me, chocolate is my passion, and my next year, I'm a professional chocolatier, but next year I want to become a master chocolatier. I want to go to France and make some good chocolate.
Yeah, Drew's a chocolatier.
Is that milk chocolate or dark chocolate?
No, dark chocolate. Yeah. I want those flavonols. I want those things that really add to heart health, cardiovascular, and brain. And I combine them with Chinese herbs, and they're exquisite.
Yeah, I do that too. I didn't even realize that was a thing, but I combine some adaptogens with 88% cacao dark chocolate. Although, don't ask about the brand because I'm sure it's not going to be in the top 5 most renowned brands of dark chocolate. Well, it's been a blast hosting you guys today. Are there any final thoughts or takeaways you'd hope listeners leave here today with?
If people just want to, take better care of their brain, and maybe they're not going to buy a Sensei device, right? There's meditative practices that have a lot of scientific backing, right? That they can start, but very simply, it's also just breath work, and in particular, heart coherence, practices. So and that can be incredibly simple. There's free apps for that. There's a company that really pioneered in this space called HeartMath that you're probably familiar with, that has a much, very, very inexpensive device that just does the heart coherence. And that by itself can do a lot of wonders for your brain health and your nervous system, which is, paramount in improving the brain health. So just encourage people to kind of take the first step there.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm a fan of doing the free and super cheap things first. And once you do those, or you want to take a shortcut and get better results faster, then you can look into the technologies and the different upgrades. But I mean, that's the way most people start, is with the most accessible, easy ways to start, and then eventually progress from there.
Yeah. Actually, one more thing there is Dr. Mark Atkinson that works with us. He wrote a couple blogs on brain health optimization tips. And that's more lifestyle based and very specific on nutrition and things like that. And I can make that available to your tribe as a PDF. I think that would be another nice first step.
That'd be awesome. And I will put a link to that and everything we discuss in the show notes of this episode. But Paola and Drew, thank you for joining me on the podcast. This has been a long time in the making since I ordered my Sensei. I don't even know how many months it's been, 18 months, 19 months ago. And I've had great experiences so far. So thank you guys for creating an awesome product and making this more accessible to the world.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thanks for your support.
I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.